tiger on the prowl. I'ma make it go wild. I'm original, and I told you so. I'm a kid in the candy store with the leather on the denim. I ain't the cure, I'm the venom. If you wanna find me, find the taillight. Something's coming in, you're gonna wanna take a red eye. It's time to go. It's time to go. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink. I don't wait for nobody. I'm a summer name on the dotty. City lights call my name, drawn to the flame, and I'm feeling kinda naughty. I hit the ground running, step out the door and I'm stunning. Better hold tight cause you know what's going down. I'm setting the pace cause this is my town. So get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink.
Hey friends, it's What Up Wednesday. We're back after a brief summer, whatever. It was an impromptu vacation, and I know you're not mad. Y'all are telling me, Keely, go take a rest, and I did, and I feel pretty good. But you know what's even more exciting than that, though, is that we've got a minor guest on today. Okay, I'm super excited about this. I was just astonished when he added me on Twitter and then wanted to start a conversation. I'm like, I've got a better plan for this. So just in a second, we'll get started with Mr. Brendan Creed. But before we do, I'm just going to say hi to a few people because once he and I start going, I have a feeling I'm going to miss a lot of comments. So if you have a question specifically, put a Q colon in front of it. And I'll put that in the search bar, and it'll be easier for me to find those as we're getting into the meat of things. If you want banter, banter away. But the Q colon will be what I really pay attention to and try to address so that Brendan can get to everything that we're going to talk about. Good morning, 4 a.m. Candace, you are, wow. I'm just gonna blow that for you. Amazing. Paul, great to see you. Sunny Corwell. Oh, Replay Squad, Hallam. Okay, I'm getting the gist of this. And Paul, Brendan, Paul is saying, what up, and get that foot better. So I know you can hear me. Aline, good to see you. You have been replay for quite a bit. Kia ora to Stefan. Hi. Adam's here. Rachel with her Cabernet Sauvignon. I think you were first, Rach. So as always, there you are. Mark Cummings. Hi, Stain, good to have you. And Ian, you've made it here and on time. I know Wednesdays aren't the best time for everybody, but I've been trying to encourage you all to change your training schedules. I mean, what are you doing? I've been Wednesday for 2.5 years. I'm just saying. Hamish, you're ditching HW. I don't know what that is, but is that hard work? Is that hardware? I don't know what that is. And you're there. Luke Pibworth. Hi. Scott Riley. And I have my groove on. No wine. It's tea. It's English breakfast tea because I like to get in the spirit of things. And also, it's only noon. I'm not allowed to drink yet. I have rules and standards. I am looking forward to it as well. Yeah, I was talking to myself. What do you think I do all day? I'm sitting here in front of this pane of glass and I'm talking to y'all. You don't think I'm already crazy? That's very funny. There you go. Okay, yeah, I love how y'all are figuring it out yourself, but great to have you. Godders, thank you. And George, haven't seen you for a hot minute. Great to have you. Okay, Center Stage Wedding and Function Band. You're my favorite fan. Okay, here's a question. I'm going to star that. That's awesome. Oh, homework. Okay, there you go. You're not meant to train, Mr. Snowman. You are way past that. Okay, let's get into it. The plunger coffee's on board for Stefan. That is awesome. Okay, let's go, because I realized that I didn't want to spend time typing on a keyboard and doing this when Brendan and I could talk face to face. So let's bring him on right now. Mr. Brendan Creed, warm welcome. You were in the den of umpires. How are you feeling?
Nervous.
Nervous. That is shocking.
That's a tough place to be in the den of umpires. It's a tough place to be.
People have long debated whether there's a nickname for a group of umpires. And, you know, I'm not saying that it's accurate, but maybe a murder of umpires. I don't know.
I'd go gaggle, like geese. I'd go gaggle.
Gaggle? Yeah. I've heard a blind of umpires, which is, ha ha ha, very funny. You know,
it's a terrible one. That's terrible.
That is terrible. That is terrible. I have heard some really awful ones, but I think an awesome of umpires also, because these are my favorite people. But anyway, here you are. You have been very busy this summer. In addition to frequenting many operating halls in many hospitals, you've even been playing some hockey. How's that been going for you?
Yeah, it was going well up until a point. But yeah, I think it's been nice to have tournaments again. It's always a bit tough when you're just traveling around for one or two matches, whereas the minute tournaments come back into play, it becomes that bit more exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think that obviously things were very disjointed over the past year, and it was like stop, go, and then they moved to the home and home system. But how do you think the Pro League prepared you guys for, as Yop called it, the most important tournament win, the FIH Pro League? Oh my God, so funny. How did it prepare you for, what happened this summer and, what you've got coming up with the Men's World Cup on the horizon here?
It's pretty, I think the new system works better.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that we're traveling so our first one's Argentina, where we play 4 games. I think that feels the format more of a tournament rather than just match play.
Yeah.
But at the same time, playing back-to-back matches consistently 1-2 months, I think is actually really beneficial as well, because it just gives you that feel of that double header that you get at a tournament where you play 2, then a day off, then another game, or however it may work at the tournaments. So I think it's worked. I think it's getting better each year. Mm-hmm. I think at some point they're going to have to decide on a format that they're going to stick with, because I think the issue they've had so far is continuity.
Really?
Yeah. Wonder if
because it's been different every season. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we discussed it today. We actually recorded our first episode on the podcast today for the new season.
Nice.
And that was one of the things that came up, was the continuity of, like, how do people get involved, or how can people really care a lot about it when you've not got that consistency that people understand what the tournament is. So like the first year we had the playoffs, which was class. It felt like a proper tournament. And then they obviously, with COVID and everything else, they had to get rid of that. And then it's not come back. And then it's now looking different again. It's kind of, well, what's the format long term is what we're kind of intrigued about, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of from an umpiring perspective, I've always felt like the Pro League made it harder on umpires, because they couldn't get that continuity either. And it's very much, if you want umpires to be consistent over a number of games in a singular competition, the best way is to have them together in one place and able to really watch each other in detail and have those conversations and be like, so can we talk about that decision? And, what are you doing there? And, I wasn't quite sure with, you're changing your positioning on that. Is there a reason? And having those conversations, I think is super important. And that, I think it was probably pretty obvious to you guys over the course of the Pro League that maybe that got things a little disjointed. for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard when at the end of the day, I don't know what the pay system is in for the umpires in those tournaments, but it's pretty. I'm imagining it's not much, if anything. But what's interesting is
Oh
the thing we discussed today was actually the training schedule. Is that at
hmm
the end of the day, we're training quite regularly,
Yeah.
whereas most umpires, obviously, it's a bit of fun on the side.
hmm
So obviously, you're working in the time. Like, do you get the opportunities to train? And as you say, that might be the prime opportunity when everybody's at. For example, now it's looking like it's going to be based and there's going to be 4 or 6 games. Is actually it might give the guys an opportunity to actually do exactly what you've just been saying in terms of helping each other and almost coaching / learning off each other and kind of
Yeah.
making that divide. Or as you say, when it's not easy, actually, it makes it a lot simpler
Yeah,
for you guys.
absolutely. I'll get back to the pay thing later. I'm sure everybody in the comments is like going, "Oh, this is delightful. Let's talk more about it." But I remember, so when you're talking about the first episode of the podcast, for those of you at home who are like me, living under a rock and didn't realize until a few days ago that Mr. Creed and Phil Roper and Yup de Mol, is he a permanent fixture? Like he's always going to be on the podcast from here on in? Is that a thing? Oh my God.
Yeah, it is now. It is a very much a thing.
They do a podcast called Let's Stick Together. And you guys, honestly, you guys know I don't like players as a rule. So if I'm going to sit there and listen to a bunch of players talking about playing, it better be good. And this is really just fine quality stuff. So make sure you go check the Let's Stick Together. Why 2 R's? Can we just...
I'll be honest. I think the issue is that there was already 1 R taken, so we had to take the second R.
Okay.
Simple as that.
We'll let you get another season on your belt, then we'll work on a rebranding thing. Like, it'll be fine. But oh my God. I was like, of course, as an umpire, I have to point that out. But there you go. Oh, yes, people are, oh dear, we've moved on to the payment discussion. But anyway, what I wanted to mention is on a couple of the episodes, when you guys were talking about the Women's World Cup, you were mentioning about how you thought it was splitting up the tournament into two different countries, although a nice sentiment really had some deleterious effects on the teams and the extra travel and just not being able to be part of a whole event in one thing. I can tell you that, the women who were umpiring there felt the same way. And that's probably the first time, that would be the first time any of them would have been in a major tournament, but they weren't all together. They had one half and one half. And it was hard for them. It was a struggle. They tried to make sure everything was together, but you've got one UM in one place, one UM in another place. And it's kind of like having your coaching staff split. And they're great as a combined whole, but when you take them apart, maybe one coach is giving you one set of information and you're getting another set and you're kind of like, I don't understand how to reconcile all this together. And so it wasn't a great system, I think, for their performance either, from what they told me. So
it's I think, as you say, like, I think it's a great idea. I just don't think it works for a sport that doesn't have enough money in it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you had more money in it, you'd have 2 umpire managers at each venue or each country. You'd have just double the amount of everything, or it'd be just a lot simpler, just because there's more money available.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're a sport that doesn't necessarily have that much money, especially in the minor countries, I think we're quite blessed in the UK, and I think obviously there's certain countries in Europe that are also blessed, and South America and things, it's one of them. But when you've got smaller countries and things like that, and umpires who are probably, as you say, it could be their first major tournament, to have it in a situation that's not easy for them, I think is quite difficult.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the teams, let alone anyone else. I think, like, as you say, like the umpires, if they've not got the support there, I think it becomes such a difficult scenario for them to kind of deal with as well. And at the end of the day, if the game can't happen without umpires, like, we've got to start looking after people better in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Let's just see if there's a few other comments to bring in first here. Mr. McCartney couldn't miss you putting a plastic boot into this subject. Very funny. And okay, and so a lot of this crowd are commenting on this whole notion of pay. So I was hoping that today what you and I could do is kind of ask each other the questions that we've always wanted to know about video referrals and maybe umpiring and playing in general, because a lot of those themes sort of tie in. So I'm going to pretend the first question you asked me was, how much do umpires get paid in international games? Is that a good opening question?
I'm intrigued.
You're
I'm
intrigued?
very intrigued.
Okay. So what kind of range? Like pick, I don't know, euros, go in euros, and how much do you think umpires get paid per game?
How much do I think, or how much do I think they should?
Oh, I'm happy for you to address both, but how much do you think that they actually get right now?
I think it's two. I think it'll be two figures. Mm-hmm. And I think it should be three.
Okay.
Plus expenses.
Plus expenses. Okay. That's very important. Let's see. Everybody's like, pay, what's that? Okay. So,
Intrigued.
surprise. Guess what they get? Nothing. They get
really?
0 figures per game.
Okay, that doesn't make much sense, but okay.
I know, right? So here's the thing: you're right in that expenses are paid, and so your hotels and your per diems, your flights, those are covered. But umpires at the FIH level do not get paid per match. End of story. And I've been, in my career, I had some experiences. I went to places like, when I went to the Junior World Cup in Santiago, Chile, they put us up in the Sheraton, and those rooms, they were fine. They were massive. The bathroom was bigger than my apartment and had like 3 showers and everything. And we had a couch that we could lay on in addition to these king size beds. Like and we were there for 3 weeks. So, I mean, granted, that was nice to have that room, but I'd never had something like that. And then you go all the way down to things like you go to a smaller tournament, like, I don't know, the CAC games in Puerto Rico, and you might be on an army base and you're sleeping with cockroaches and you're eating in the army mess hall with the officers and all kinds of crazy stuff. But the theme that runs true is that what your per diem is going to be scaled on the economics of the country that you're in, because the national association's only going to have so much money, right? So the host has to pay for the umpires, and there might be different agreements with the FIH and things like that. And maybe the FIH is the host, and that gets a little bit more complicated, but it's the host association that comes up with the money for those costs. So they're always looking at ways to trim as much as possible. But yeah, umpires volunteer their travel, their vacation time, their holidays, don't get paid. 0.
So so what I'm trying to work out is if it's the host country.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, let's choose a country out of the blue. So let's say Canada, for example. So Canadian Hockey Association, the Canadian Hockey Association would then have to obviously pay for the teams to come.
Yep.
They then have to pay for the FIH to come. And does that include the umpires, or is it FIH's responsibility to pay for themselves to get there, and then the umpires come separately? If that makes sense.
So when you say the FIH, do you mean like admin people, execs and stuff?
Yeah, and TV crews and things like that. And
yeah.
this,
So,
that, and the other.
well, I think the costs are different depending on what kind of event it is. Now, let's say the Olympic qualifier series, Canada, Ireland, back before Tokyo. God, COVID memory. Yeah. And so it was 2 games in Vancouver, and so it's an FIH responsibility tournament. So it's a top tier tournament. The PAF isn't involved in it whatsoever, and it's combined financial agreement between Field Hockey Canada and the FIH. And the FIH would probably bear a lot of responsibility in the cost of bringing all the umpires in, because the umpires are their appointment. Yeah. FHC has nothing to do with who gets to go and that sort of thing. So they're paying a lot of that. But as hosts, Field Hockey Canada would have been paying for a share of the broadcast costs, the infrastructure that was needed and things like that. Actual FIH people traveling over, that's gonna be on the FIH for sure. So
I wonder if it should be the FIH that pay the umpires rather than the host nations. It should just strictly be an FIH thing, because that would make the most sense, because at the end of the day, they're almost just as well, if we're talking about broadcasting and things like that, they're just as important as the broadcasting. So surely it comes under that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how if it's an employee thing or whatever it'd be. I don't know how it would work, but that's bizarre to me that they don't. It's bizarre to me that at the top level, people aren't getting paid.
Yeah.
I know they're getting supported, but it's not. It's not the same as, at the end of the day, they're giving up time to work.
Yeah.
Almost free of charge. With it's a bit backwards.
It is. It's very backwards. It's very backwards. And I mean, this is fascinating because we kind of assume that you guys know that we're just out there because we love the game. We get to sit in these amazing seats and watch you guys do like amazing stuff on the field, and we get to be a part of shaping the best kind of product that we can put out there. But we just assume that you know that we're not out there for financial gain whatsoever. And then when you talk about support, I mean, that's another interesting question, because all of the pro league umpires that you saw over the last little while, and from that group, have been selected the World Cup umpires that you're about to see in India. They all have really stringent physical tests that they have to meet. So, and like their yo-yo scores are really close to what I understand to be many international programs standards as well, because it was come up with by a Loughborough trainer or something like that. And so they have to work incredibly hard. And, you know, I know that you're still young and you're not feeling it yet, but as you get a little bit older, it gets a little harder to run after all you young people. So you got to work extra hard just to meet those standards. And every umpire I know pays for their own trainers.
That's what I was going to say, is do you get, as part of being part of it, do you get a free gym membership or something where they can partner with a gym or something? I don't know, David Lloyd or something that's pretty worldwide in terms of that access. Can you get that should be surely part of it, but again, that's probably me just being naive on that front.
It's not. And I mean, so many people have to do it on their own because they obviously have their full-time jobs, they've got their families, they got whatever, and they have to spend their spare time doing it. So it's not like they're part of a centralized umpiring program where they get to all train together and there's a staff who knows how to help them get to the markers that they need to hit for their sprint times and their yo-yo times and all that sort of things. So you need somebody with some individual attention as well. I know that there's a couple umpires, like, you know, you'll take Loreen, and, you know, she's still playing in the women's prem and playing on the national indoor team. So she's getting that training through her club. So she's probably doing like whatever she does to train to play is going to be perfect for umpiring, really. So, you know, she's got that benefit, but there's a lot of umpires who don't have anything like that. And they're just, you know, hanging out in Canada alone, no friends, nobody to train with. It's like, okay, I better hire somebody to help me get through that. So,
well, I think the opportunity there is the education side of it. Should there be someone central within FIH, or two people central within FIH that you can speak to, ask questions, and they can give you that advice, that kind of training? I mean, there might be an opportunity for somebody who's just graduated or something to be able to be that person where you can kind of almost set programs for people and gradually make them more and more individually tailored. It might take some time, but at least it's a start to kind of support you guys on the road to where you want to get to, or where people feel they should get to.
And there are programs that get circulated. So like the World Cup panel umpires will have something to do, but in order to, you know, you need access to facilities to do that. You need the time to do that. 100%. You need proper nutrition. You need all the pieces together. And it takes a big sort of investment, but
this comes back to the pay packet thing of, if you support people a little bit more, does it give them, even if that, let's say, for example, it was £200 a month, at least that goes towards a gym membership and potentially some healthier food options, rather than just working the whole time and don't really have that opportunity. Even something small as that would go a long way in terms of just helping support people.
Yeah, absolutely. This might be a good question to bring in right here. This is our friend Stefan. He's from New Zealand, and he's asking, how much would the cost go up if umpiring is professional? Would it reduce the criticism of the comm games, for example, since competition countries provided umpires and some didn't get a lot of top competition? What do you think about that? I can fill in some of the blanks in terms of how the umpires were appointed to that kind of tournament, but
from what we gather is every nation brings an umpire, and then the umpires, and then there's a few others extras that come in, and then basically as you go through the tournament, the better umpires get more of the better positional games in terms of like your 15th to 6th or your 9th to 10th is not necessarily the best umpires, whereas as you get to semi-finals and finals, it's the better umpires or the higher ranked umpires that get it.
Yeah,
was what our assumption is. As players.
Yeah, that's absolutely natural. It's absolutely natural.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is back to like the education side of it. So as you're saying with the Pro League and things like that, it's a real opportunity for countries that don't necessarily have that access to kind of go and speak to the umpires that are higher up and kind of have that conversation. I'm sure that happens.
Yeah.
Real opportunity there to kind of create a learning environment. But if it's professional, I don't think that necessarily should change in those competitions. I think what all that happens is each nation's umpires will get better because they're being looked after better and education's better. That then actually it gets to a point where actually the officiating catches up. And Yoop actually says it on the podcast. He says he reckons that whilst the playing has got better over the course of the past 20, 30 years and taken a drastic jump, umpiring maybe necessarily hasn't made as big a jump. Which was quite an interesting take on it. And I think he's coming from a point of view of the speed of the game has changed so much. And because we're training so much, it goes back to that training thing of our umpires having the opportunity to actually train in the same way that the players group are.
Yeah.
And it was quite an interesting comment because I was like, took me a little bit of time to process. I'm a bit of a slow processor on that stuff. So I sat there and I was trying to just think about it. And it was actually really interesting, the point. And it kind of goes back to that professional side of it is at the end of the day, if people are getting supported more, actually does that give the opportunity for them people to get better quicker rather than it takes that little bit longer?
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because I mean I've been around a little longer than you, and I've seen, I think, more of the transitions over the last 2 decades and sort of what's been happening. And yeah, I mean, when I was a teenager and I started playing, the game was just glacial and it was really easy to umpire. Like even a slowpoke like me had no problems at all. But if I were on the pitch now, like, let's pretend I'm not 50, but if I were on the pitch now, I'd struggle with the pace and the tempo. And it's not about lack of willingness or commitment or anything like that.
Yeah.
It is that professionalism, because programs like yours are, you're still not getting compensated well enough, but you at least have consistent funding. So this is your full-time gig. There isn't a single umpire for whom that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is going to be a gap. There has to be a gap. And how do we address that? Because it's tough to quantify though, the difference. I mean, maybe umpires were really shitty 30 years ago and we just didn't notice, because nothing was televised, nothing was broadcast and live streamed and all that kind of thing, which is sort of the era that we're in now, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is kind of, as you say, with technology advancements. So as everything's getting streamed, you've also got more people that are hiding behind a screen as well that can kind of vocalize their points a lot more aggressively than previously, what obviously would have been the case, where at the end of the day, if you wanted to have a conversation with somebody, you had to either pick up the phone or go and see them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about that at a couple points. I think I just caught one of the episodes where you were talking about trolls and about how that dynamic has changed for you guys as players, because, even in a relatively low profile sport like hockey, now all your games are getting live streamed and people can go back on YouTube and watch .hockey and they can watch games and they reach out and they want to tell you what they think on a regular basis. And, I know you talked about how in Rio, the social media was completely shut down, which was really great and stuff like that. Has that been different over the course of sort of the Pro League? And because you can't stay off social media for 6 months and ignore
Yeah, I think
everything, right?
it's really interesting because people obviously voice their opinions, but it's not necessarily just results driven now. It's more a case of if people don't like how you play, they'll tell you, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So I remember we played in the 2019 Euros. We came fifth and we lost our final group game, or we drew our final group game against Spain. And we needed to win.
Yeah.
And I was a bit gutted. Like I had an all right game. I didn't play amazing, but I had an all right game. And I went on Twitter, and the first thing somebody said was like, "That Creed keeps turning the ball over." And I was like, "Oh, okay, it's like this, is it?" Okay, which is really interesting because the dynamic for obviously you want to kind of please people that are watching whilst also playing as well as you can do. And then the minute you see people aren't happy, it does hit you quite hard.
Yeah.
I think but gradually as you just get more and more used to it, you just create a bit of a tougher outer skin. And then the classic, there's points where you just want to respond.
Yeah.
And you're like, is it worth it? Probably not. Because at the end of the day, the only thing it only comes across negatively for you as an athlete if you get involved aggressively.
Yeah.
But I find it really interesting, the fact that it's getting more and more prevalent in the world that we're in. And that's the bit that I find really interesting because people feel they can speak to you. So for example, like you finish a game and you go over to the sides and it's normally really positive with people, regardless of the result. But then the minute you go online and you see the rest of the world and how it all kicks off, it's madness, absolute carnage.
Yeah.
Prime example is, so England Hockey's Twitter, they've had a bit of a revamp, a bit of a reshake, and they've been brilliant. But so if the Women's World Cup, if you look at the interactions they have, so the interactions are basically quite like safe and sensible. People are like, yeah, go on girls, this, that, and the other. They lost to Argentina in the quarterfinal. They put a tweet up and it had something like, and normally they get about 20 responses, maybe 25 responses. Yeah. I think they got 1,000 responses just from Argentinian people that just flooded it with just basically info and kind of basically just being quite abusive towards England. Obviously a bit of context in terms of the Falklands and things like that, but it was really interesting of like, that was the way they kind of went about it. And that for me is like, oh Lord, social media is really something different than what probably people would have ever thought in terms of the context of it.
Yeah.
And that's where like something like Birmingham, for example, was magic for us because it was hockey being played internationally outside of London. Which was actually massive for us as a country because what you then do is you then engage more people, but then with that, the social media side of it is also very different because then you get people who don't normally watch hockey voicing opinions as well and things like that. And it's brilliant. I really do think it's great. It's just as an athlete, you have to create a tougher outer skin to be able to contextualize and understand and appreciate the fact that people engaging is good, whether it's positive or negative, it is still good. You've just got to be good basically to then for it to be positive, which is again normal. I think that's quite a normal thing.
Absolutely.
I find it fascinating.
That's been the struggle that I've had ever since I started on social media back in 2006. And my whole goal was that I wanted to present a piece of umpiring and officiating culture that was positive and that was supportive and encouraging and like celebrating people's appointments and their promotions and that they had a great game, and then to educate as well and to do some of that. And what sort of happened over the last few years, and especially now with just how much more involved fans have been getting on social media, I do find myself in that position of being the umpire defender. And I kind of like that, but I also just want it to be my value is that I want people to understand and I want people to improve. And sometimes that means the umpires are wrong. And I get to try to explain how that may have come about and what I think is more important and, how they needed to look at this part of the play. And that would have been a better reflection and given you a better decision in that moment and maybe this positioning and blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to the trolling that has happened recently, like, I don't know if you heard after that Canada-Ireland series that Diego Barbas, he was the video umpire in that case. We're actually going to get to video umpiring in just a second here. I can tell we're winding our way towards it, but
The segue is getting there.
I know, but this is just too much fun. But Diego there, after that second match where Ireland lost, and obviously we're very upset, understandable. He got death threats on Twitter, as if this were football or something. Like, death threats?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? So he had to shut down his Twitter, and I was checking on him to make sure he was okay and all that kind of stuff. And it was really awful. And then after, there was a problem in the World Cup, and there was a problem at the Commonwealth Games, and it just always seems to happen when India's on the field. They got to stop doing that, where there's technical issues with shootouts or timings and things like that. And just the abuse that gets focused, and these people put up pictures of the umpires, and they're like, this umpire is racist and biased. And it's like, really, guys? Really? Is that? We've had, I mean, on the death threat thing, I think it's the classic, everything's been blown out of proportion. At the end of the day, it was like incredible the way it kind of unfolded. That, because I remember watching it, because one of our, we've got a few Northern Irish guys that have moved across to England. I was speaking to them about it, and they said it's a travesty in terms of, like, at the end of the day, you don't want it to happen the way it's happened. But also to go to the extreme of a death threat is just baffling. And on the racial stuff on Twitter with India, I find it absolutely baffling. So obviously when our boys played against, so in the third game at the commies when England played, the amount of abuse again came through is absolutely fascinating. I find it really interesting because it's people that it's a lack of education, to be perfectly honest with you. Because it's just a ridiculous notion to even suggest it. And then obviously with the, as you say, with the hooter and the time not really working in the semi-final, it was semi-final, wasn't it? Between India and Australia at the commies for the women. We had that same problem in the EHL. So Surbiton, we played against Waterloo Ducks in, oh God, what year will it have been? 2018? 2018. I'd forgotten about that.
We played them in the knockouts. We drew. We felt we had a really good opportunity. They went on to win it, but in the shootout, our youngster Zach, who's now unbelievable, Zach Wallace, took his shuffle, scored it. Hooter didn't work, then got brought back, missed it, and then obviously there's this. We've got people kicking off and things, but never got to the point of the death threat side of things. But it was obviously people were incredibly frustrated at just the system. You can't blame anybody but the system, and it's just how it works. But to go down the route of race is quite baffling from Commonwealth Games. I think it's people that are passionate, but the passion's probably been placed in the wrong place. Unfortunately. And then the driver is, as you say, social media, and suddenly you've got, at the end of the day, when you've got a country that's passionate and it's got so many hockey fans in it, unfortunately there's a lot of people that jump on the bandwagon, and that's the danger of it, is the fact that it just starts to snowball, and eventually you're dealing with a tweet that's got 1,000 retweets or whatever it is on for just basically from people just being poorly educated on the matter.
Exactly. And that's why we're here, right? Is that we're gonna get some stuff straight today. That's what we're doing. And it's funny, like here's Ben talking about Indian hockey Twitter, and I've talked to a few people like this. I was talking to Simon Mason about this the other day, about how I don't think it's that there's more terrible people or that one country or one region or something like that have worse fans than others. I just think when you have a population of fans so big, statistically speaking, if 3% of them are complete assholes, then that means that there's 20,000 of them. Whereas if they were Canadian fans, that'd be 2, so it's a totally different, it's scale. It's about scale. And and
Yeah,
algorithmic
exactly.
scale. And yeah,
I
so
mean, if you look at the FAH voting in terms of like with the year when they took a clean sweep of everything,
mhm,
it's nothing but sheer numbers.
mhm,
I think if you spoke to, and I'm not saying that the players and the staff that voted and won everything aren't good. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is it was a bit confusing in terms of at the end of the day to take a clean sweep despite not winning any major tournaments on any side. And yeah, they did very well, and they're coming back to the forefront of where India used to be in the world in terms of the
yeah,
hockey side of things. To win a clean sweep despite not winning anything is quite bizarre
yeah,
when there's clearly, and the other options, like we had the long discussion in terms of on the podcast, we've discussed it multiple times. At the end of the day, if you've got a population and you're going to go to the online side of things, the biggest population will win. There's
yeah,
no argument about it. Like at
obviously.
the end of the day, if you've got 1 million people and they're all going, and you've got countries that are obviously smaller in terms of hockey nations, at the end of the day are a lot smaller.
Hmm.
Apart from India, India has got the biggest following. So
Yeah,
unsurprisingly, I mean, probably you've got what Argentina are probably second in terms of that general population of just the size of the country and how much hockey probably means in terms of the passion and that side of things.
yeah, that's fair.
But no one matches India,
Yeah,
not even close.
yeah,
And that's the bit that's kind of really interesting when you give the fans the opportunity. Fair play, they took it with both hands and they ran with it.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then obviously clean sweep happened, but
Yeah,
at the same time to go from that point of view, like I think it's one of the, it's really interesting, as you say, sheer numbers is unfortunately the thing that either looks great at times
yeah,
and on the flip side can really make a country not look,
yeah,
or can make a situation not look great at all just simply because of sheer numbers.
yeah, absolutely. Oh, let's see. Here we go. Somebody's getting us back to the initial topic, and yeah, okay, I'm going to start this, and we'll get to it because this has just been it's been really cool to talk about all this stuff. But the whole reason that we're here is that you took to Twitter and you had these great ideas, and I hope it didn't come across like I was just passing off like I don't want to talk about this, but I also feel like there were just so many things because like these are really great ideas that you had, but even with our little warm up, I think you're probably looking at some of the issues maybe in a bit of a different light because it's a little more complicated than just, can we fix the technology? So here you were asking for some feedback on these ideas, and one of your ideas was to mic up the umpires, the video, and the two pitches, not only to each other, but to the TV commentary and the speakers at the stadium. So I know you watched a lot of games during the Women's World Cup because you were recovering, and you admitted that on the podcast. And I was like, that's so cool. We were all watching the same games together. Did you notice the difference between the experience at Amstelveen and Terrassa in those two stadiums?
Not particularly.
Because at Amstelveen, the umpires were mic'd throughout. The pitch umpires were mic'd throughout, so you could hear everything that they were saying to the players on the pitch.
Yeah.
But at Terrassa, they weren't. So we had no idea.
I'm guessing that's because because the setup was there better at Amsterdam?
Well, I mean, we don't have to get all judgy with better, but it was different. And I guess part of it is that obviously Amstelveen has a lot more experience putting on those kind of top level matches. But one of the things that I learned in talking to a few people is that the production setup for video referral and for the umpires communications is absolutely different at every single venue because it's a different production team at every single venue. And I think when there was the weekend of the Pro League where the ladies were playing China, and I think you guys were playing, maybe you were playing Spain or you're playing somebody else down at Lee Valley, and they brought in a football crew. So when they couldn't get the communication between the video umpire and the pitch umpire, and everybody was standing there for 3 minutes going, what the hell's happening? And the pitch umpire was like, this is awkward. The crew that was responsible for that entire production had never done hockey before. That's something I know. No. These are the
It's,
things that get in the
yeah, I
way.
think it's funny because when it's the interesting thing is like as you say, like I didn't notice because I just assumed. So, for example, like, I didn't notice the difference between Amsterdam and Spain. But what's
Hmm.
interesting is I probably did notice. I just didn't realize.
Yeah,
Because as you say, like I'm so used to hearing the umpires on it that I just didn't notice that it didn't happen in Spain,
yeah,
um, which is really interesting. And as you say, if you don't have a production team that are used to working with hockey, it becomes a little bit more complicated, as you say, because football just doesn't have that problem.
yeah,
Um, and I wonder if the education side of it is, do you use then rugby crews or crews that are used to working with rugby
yeah,
because they work almost a very similar system to how we would,
yeah,
in terms of that setup.
yeah.
Because that's what's really interesting. And I saw Steve Tabb's question thing underneath in terms of he put in a point about the countries aren't used to using it. I think the beauty is that if you use this system, for example,
Hmm.
one, it gives a training opportunity in pro league. So if we're told there's people that aren't used to working it, that's a completely different ball game to people who we assume are top of the game, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But also it gives that opportunity for umpires to discuss, and if they think there's a better angle, actually, then you can change the angle to help each other out, and this, that, and the other. It kind of just works a
Yeah.
little bit more supportive rather than necessarily getting rid of, which I
Yeah.
think gives a real opportunity for the smaller countries who don't normally get that exposure to actually utilize it to the full of its advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings up a question that I don't want to be all rhetorical about it, but what do you think goes into the training of a video umpire? Like, how do you think international umpires train to take their spot in the booth?
I assume almost like a video game style in terms of they should just be given a little bit of almost playtime with it and just
Mm-hmm.
kind of explore themselves.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, obviously, it's pretty hard to get a film crew and everything else and it all to be there. But I think what you've got to understand is basically you're working on angles the whole time.
Yeah.
So can you find the correct angle quickest? I
Yeah.
think is probably one of the big things.
Yeah.
And I think, as you say, like to be able to get better at it, at the end of the day, you've got to just do it more.
Yes. Yes.
So if it means that post game you're sat there for 15, 20 minutes and just playing around with angles and things like that and trying to work out what the best way to find things, or as you say, like at the end of the day, if you get a referral and it takes, let's say, for example, it takes 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
can you get another can you basically go back and see, well, how can I shorten that to 4 minutes or to 3 minutes or to 2 minutes? Because we're not
Yeah.
saying everything has to be 5 seconds or 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But the more we can shorten the longer ones, that's when the improvement comes massively and the sport gains its speed again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as you say, I don't know what the training is in terms
Yeah.
of how people get better at it. My assumption is in the same way that you get better with a video game or you get better at playing, you just have to do it more and more and more until you become more and more comfortable with the technology.
Yeah.
But as you say, unfortunately, if the teams are working differently and there's different ways of doing it in different countries and things like that, that then becomes very awkward.
Yeah.
And that's when, at the end of the day, that's probably something that we've not necessarily, well, we didn't know. I
Yeah.
think our assumption is because it's BT Sport that produced the Pro League,
Mm-hmm.
everything should be exactly the same because it's the same technical blanket team. But obviously, it's not.
Yeah.
It's never going to be.
I mean, I'm not sure in depth about the intricacies of how they go out to subcontract the actual production of certain events, but it's, yeah, you know, the players, the umpires, the technical officials, they can be presented with a completely different setup, you know, every time. But one of the fun parts about video umpiring is that just like with saying getting paid for games, it doesn't exist. So the first time that I sat down in a video booth to do a video referral, I had zero training. Zero training. And one of the weird things about the Commonwealth Games is that you've got this, it's an invitational, okay? It's an invitational because it's not open to the entire world,
It's not
or
ranked. Yeah.
a qualification system that we're used to that really funnels up. And so you have teams like, you know, Ganya and Kenya and, you know, rocking up. And one of the biggest ironies for me watching the Commonwealth Games was that I think it was the Kenyan women, or maybe it was the Ghanaian women. They lost like one video referral for the whole tournament. And every other one of them, they're like, yep, got it. They knew exactly when to refer and when not to. And they won like incredible amounts of referrals. We're like, where did you guys learn how to do that? And maybe they watched a lot of game footage, who knows? But for the umpires, you get plunked down, and you might get an opportunity before the matches start to sit down, and there'll be a briefing where they'll go through the procedures and things like that. But one of the challenges is that I remember back in the day, and Andy Mayer or somebody like that, they had a different system where they were able to manipulate the controls themselves. They were able to, go back a few frames, go forward a few frames, and see what they needed to do. But they have to sit there with a director, and they have to say, I want to see this, and I want to see this angle. Can you go back to this thing? No. 2 more seconds. No, it's the part at the top of the circle. I don't want to see that part. I want to see the part at the top of the circle. And then you'll have language barriers. So you might be in Terrassa, you're working with a production team who are, you know, majority Spanish speaking, and maybe you're from a country where English wasn't your first language, and you're trying to speak in English to somebody whose first language also isn't English, and you're trying to get these things together. And I think that is often one of the factors that delays the response in you guys getting, you know, the decision out there. And it's really stressful for the umpires as well, because they're no, I want that footage. No, okay, go back to that thing. And then it might take 2 or 3 angles, and then they say, you know what? The best angle would be the one we don't have, which is, say, flat on with the top of the circle. But boy, wouldn't that be handy to be able to see if the balls come outside the circle or not? Who knew, you know? So
yeah, I think the other thing on it is, so obviously teams got to a point where they would ask a question. If the question was phrased incorrectly, you basically would lose a referral, because the umpires would then ask the question incorrectly to what you're actually trying to get, which then meant that referrals then became more and more vague.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually it got to the point now where it's like, there's a foul in the D somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's your responsibility as the video umpire to go find it. And we get frustrated because we're like, we know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But if we ask exactly what it is, there's a chance that we ask it wrong. That then means we just lose it automatically.
Yeah.
So then you're waiting 5 minutes for something that we know has happened. And this is kind of back to my point of, if it's on a big screen and we can see it, why are we not able to act on it? Why do we have to wait for somebody else who's on a smaller screen where it's going to be more difficult, who's also, as you say, working potentially with a language barrier, this, that, and the other? Like, there's so many different factors.
Yeah.
Why can we not just go, you can see it? Because we've said it before, like, you can literally see the foul, and they've gone, sorry, can't talk to you right now. And it's like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But we're trying to say, like, it's there.
Yeah.
It's there in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that's kind of, that's
a really interesting part. So I had Ayanna McLean on the show, I don't know, forever ago in COVID years. And she's one of the best video umpires in the world, because she's gotten, you know, a ton of experience. And she talked about how at her first tournament, she was appointed exclusively as a video umpire, and she was in the booth for like 7 games a day sort of thing. And so the volume of matches she's done, and as you were talking about, it's all about reps, right? But she was saying that one of the things that she's had to train herself to do in the booth is not to take, because they are watching the game. So that was one of the interesting points that people were banding about on Twitter, and they were saying, well, wouldn't it help if they watched the game? And it's like, yeah, they are watching the game. And I'm sure, because we all do this as umpires, we're watching and we're making decisions in our mind. We're like, foul, foot, corner, advantage. And we're doing all these things in our heads. But she said she has to teach herself not to come to a conclusion based on what the big screen is showing, because she'll see something from a different angle that doesn't get broadcast. That'll be like, oh, actually, it totally didn't hit her foot. It actually hit the defender's foot. Whoa. And then what we're all seeing on the broadcast is not at all what they have access to in the booth. And
Yeah.
that happened at the Olympic qualifier in Canada. That's happened on, a lot of big calls that, were just so hard to explain. And then after the game, it's not like the umpire rocks up to a press conference and then says, "Hi, let me explain that decision to you." It doesn't happen. So there's a lot of sort of, weird complications that go into that.
Yeah.
And
we had the two. So the two things. So what's interesting is, like, as you say, because you don't get any formal training, but also this is the first generation where it's happened. So is
Yeah.
it now a case of the training will now come because actually there's now people here who have been in that situation that actually realized there needs to be training for people to get better quickly.
yeah.
And I was speaking to Barry and Becky Middleton, hockey royalty in the UK.
Oh yeah.
In terms of, so they were discussing that actually it potentially might be that there might be a fourth umpire that comes in, because of the amount of off the ball incidents that are happening at the moment. Actually, what it then gives license to is 2 umpires to umpire the game, a third umpire to actually watch the game and video umpire, and the fourth umpire is looking for stuff off the ball, because at the moment there's been quite a few. So that we had one with Ephraims and Wallace in the semi-final off the ball.
Yeah.
We had Gurjan and Sorsby in the
Yep.
India-England game.
Yeah. I covered that
obviously
in one
there
of the
was-
shows.
Obviously, the Panesar Griffiths scenario, that was dealt with pretty well, to be honest, in terms of, I thought the umpires did really well. We've had it before in the Pro League the first year in our semi-final against Australia. We had a corner, went for a headside tip in, so left deflector went in to deflect it. Blockers just hit him completely off the ball. He's concussion for 3-4 weeks. It's a horrendous. It's a horrendous tackle. It's a ban.
Yeah.
Both umpires didn't see it. The video referral didn't pick it up. So then, unfortunately, what happens is they just give him a card and it's dealt with there and then. Whereas actually, retrospectively, it was Hayward on Martin. It was a horrendous tackle.
I remember
that needs to get
yeah.
dealt with, and it needs to get dealt with by somebody else. And that's where potentially the fourth umpire comes in, because and again, it goes back to because the speed of the sport is so quick these days.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, umpires have only got 2 eyes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And the 2 umpires are going to be watching the ball. They're going to be watching the game. The third umpire, it just gives that fourth umpire that opportunity to basically check around the pitch to see if anything happens.
Yeah.
And then it might be the case that actually they can look at the video, for example, whilst the game's going on. There's a separate feed where they can go back to the video and see if it's picked up on camera, and then be like, just to let you know, there's been an off the ball incident, so-and-so, this so-and-so, that, done, dealt with, done. There's no issues, that's it, done. Because that's the other thing that's happening that potentially might help out in terms of that umpire side of things. But again, it goes back to facilities, it goes back to umpires getting paid, it goes back to the whole issue of probably finance in terms of can that be the next stage? Because again, that's another thing that can help push the sport again.
To be totally fair, I think this is one of the most achievable suggestions that you and a lot of other people on Twitter were talking about this, how, why can't the video umpire be the one to say, hey, because they are watching the game and they have access to all these different feeds, and they could be like, oh, I just saw that thing. They just need to be empowered. It needs to be in their briefing. It needs to be in the video umpire regulations that are published for all the tournaments. And I've got those on speed dial to always be looking at. But if it was explicitly in there, if the video umpire observes a breach of the code of conduct, because that's ultimately what you guys are kind of getting held to, they may, communicate with the pitch umpires and give a recommendation at an appropriate stage of play. Problem solved. And they're there. You don't even need them. You don't even need a fourth umpire. They are the fourth umpire, because you have the 2 on the pitch. You have a reserve umpire. So you have somebody at the table who has their view on things, which can be very useful because they're looking at a different angle than anybody who's
100%.
actually on the pitch. And then the video between between those two observers, you have enough, but it needs to be added to the regulations to say an umpire can do this. Because you can imagine what would happen, right? If all of a sudden out of nowhere, and especially if the communication isn't on the broadcast, the pitch umpire stops time, is going like this, right? Gotcha, pulls out a red card and sends somebody off. And everybody's,
exactly.
whoa, what's happening? Because that's not picked up by the directors. It's not put through on the broadcast. The communication isn't shared, so nobody knows what's happening. The commentators don't even know what's happening because most of the time, or some of the time, they can't hear what's going on between those two, so they can't even relay that to the broadcast. So that, now that I think of it, that's the thing that really needs to change, is that overall access to those comms. And a big part of that is expense. So I was told by very reputable sources who will remain anonymous that one of the reasons that we don't get to see all of the angles that the video umpires do is that the tournament, whoever that is, purchases a package of images that they have the rights to transmit. So the FIH gets the rights to 3 cameras at that end, 3 cameras on that end, and that's it. But there might be 12 cameras at the facility that you've got one over the goal, another one over the goal, and you got a couple different ones for the video referral purposes, but they haven't purchased the rights to those because they can't afford it.
This is,
you know,
because I only learned about this because when Holland came over, when we played against the Netherlands in London, they had their own feed. They had their own highlights package that FIH didn't have. And so they had, as you say, like different angles. And that's the only way when you were saying then, that's the only reason I've just been like, hold on. Yeah, that makes complete sense because I've witnessed it. I was like, oh, that's quite interesting. It's quite interesting that, as you say, they don't want to, and again, as you say, it's expense. At the end of the day, it's always money, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think it's a lack of willpower, but the FIH isn't going to walk out there and say, hi guys, we can't afford to put all these broadcast angles out. They're going to gloss over that and make it not sound like quite so much.
Yeah.
But in that process of trying to, maintain their reputation, the umpires get thrown under the bus because there's no other way to explain it. And it doesn't matter how many times I say it on Twitter. Somebody's like, it's so clear in the Scotland-South Africa women's match at the Commonwealth Games when there was that big argument over about the ball outside the circle and things like that. And they're like, look at this grainy picture that I've blown up from the broadcast. It's clearly, outside. And it's like, it's not. Like, there's nothing clear about that at all. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't from that picture. But trust me, if we just tilted it this way, the camera was just over here, you'd see something totally different. And it's just so hard to translate that and to get that out there. And we want players to trust. We want you guys to feel like we're doing a good job and you're getting good decisions and that sort of thing. But we're hamstrung, Well,
this goes back to kind of like, as you say, like, let's say, for example, on that, what you could have is let's say a corner, you could have the reserve umpire go and stand at the top of the D and just see if the ball goes out. Mm-hmm. If they had that opportunity, they could go and stand on that line. So then the umpire can watch what's going on, who's in the D. Mm-hmm. The second umpire can then watch to see if there's any danger in terms of the damage or anything like that. And you've got that third umpire, the video umpire, who can watch it as well. Mm. I think the interesting thing will be, as you say, when, let's say, for example, everyone's held to that code of conduct, is, let's say, for example, there's going to be interpretations about what it looks like to different people. So I think like that's the one danger with, at the end of the day, hockey's a non-contact sport, but it is a contact sport. Yeah. It's become more and more contact, and that's not a bad thing. I think it's actually quite a good thing. It's just controlled contact is the big thing about it. Yeah. And that's the next bit, is kind of, if that's the way that FIH want to go, I don't speak to anybody about that stuff. It'd be really interesting to know if that's the route they'd want to go, is kind of, that would be the next bit of the education bit. So for example, like in the same way that you have like in rugby, you get shepherding, and in football, you get shepherding. you get people obviously like getting tripped up and things like that. Then it becomes, is it innocuous? Is it deliberate? Like this, that, and the other. There's so many different nuances that naturally people will do differently and see differently. I think the big thing is kind of the more consistent we can get, and again, it takes a little bit of time to get that consistency and continuity. The more we get to that point, that's when it's going to be, okay, well, actually, this isn't a discussion point anymore because it's working great.
Yeah.
And that's the ideal scenario, is that it's not a discussion point. At the moment, it's a discussion point because things aren't going that well in terms of it's not been done well at the moment, realistically.
Yeah. Okay.
Compared to what potentially it could get to. And as you say, like, unfortunately, umpires get quite a lot of the wrath because at the end of the day, a mistake is, because they've got this extra layer of support in terms of that video stuff. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's not necessarily helping them out as much as it probably should do. And that's the next bit, is can we help? Can the sport help them out to then get to a point where it's not a talking point, everything's grand, people are supported, then suddenly, okay, well, it's back on the players then. And if mistakes happen, then mistakes happen. That's sport. And that's the other thing, is kind of, at the end of the day, everybody makes mistakes. Like, the video is going to make mistakes at times. That's just natural. It's, can we limit the amount of mistakes, or can we make it more consistent?
And that brings me to an interesting question that I would ask you, because, you know, I have experience as a fan watching a different set of sports than you do. So when you talk about rugby union and you know, other sport ball, I'm not sure, because I'm not super embedded in that culture, and I know so many of the things, so many of the procedures have roots in the sport that a stranger to the sport wouldn't understand, and sort of puts me in the position of what a lot of people are when they watch hockey. They have no idea why things are done this way. They're like, I don't get it. This is stupid. We should be doing it like rugby does, or this sort of thing. But what do you think of the thought, and I've read this in a few places, that video referral, VAR, whatever procedure it is in whatever sport, actually has been proven not to reduce the amount of controversy in matches, but actually makes it worse. Because without video referral, it's like, humans. We get it. It happens. But when you introduce an element that's supposed to eliminate or even reduce mistakes, and mistakes still occur, the separation of that mistake from, not even the separation, but still the frustration that people have that things aren't going right. But you've got this technology, you've got these dials you can turn, you can see it plainly on a screen. It gets people even more angry. What would you say to that? Does that make sense to you? Or do you think that really we should be able to get to point in sports, in all kinds of sports, that video review should be flawless and help everybody out?
I think it's amazing, isn't it? Because we've, again, as players, like, we have this discussion of, at the end of the day, if a human's making a decision, so let's say, for example, we have coaches that umpire in training sessions. Mm-hmm. You know they're going to make mistakes because it's not their job.
Yeah.
So you have to try and get on with it. And you get frustrated about things, and kind of, it's a bit frustrating. I think, like, what's really interesting is kind of, is that point of, like, what's the best way to describe it? I think what's really interesting is the more you put money into it, the more it has to be perfect.
Yeah.
So the minute you get a video referral system, it has to be better. It has to be better. And if it's not, right, okay, you're wasting money, but more the fact that, like, as you say, like, if decisions aren't going well, or like the creative code. So let's say, for example, the video, let's use the Sarah Jones Wales versus, oh God, who are they playing? South Africa? Yeah, they were playing South Africa. That for me is a stonewall stroke. Like, there's no thought in my mind about it. But the minute you bring a video into it, is you start looking at the speed of it, you start looking about the decisions, you start looking about where the bodies are, things like that.
Yeah. Suddenly
there's a little bit of doubt, and that doubt can grow. And the minute there's a bit of doubt, you can't clearly give an answer.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that, like, for me as a player, and I've watched it back multiple times, I watched it on your show, like, for me, that's still a stroke. It's a no-brainer as a player.
Mm-hmm.
But then the minute you get a 10% bit of doubt because you've managed to slow everything down and you can see, no advice possible, or 20% doubt, I can't give you 100% this has hit a foot or this, that, and the other. I can't really give you an answer because there's that little bit of doubt. Whereas I think that's the beauty of it, is the fact that it does give you clear cut certain things. But the minute you bring in interpretation, you're not going to get. So, for example, with VAR, yeah, it creates controversy. But what's brilliant about it is the fact that it goes, normally if it's an offside or something like that, in the same way that like American football would be, if once you've passed the line of scrimmage and you throw a ball, it's clear cut. It is or it isn't. There's no. But the minute you go for like, was there a foul in the build up? Was there a shirt tug in the build up? Like this kind of stuff is then goes back to my point of like, if people aren't exactly the same in terms of their thinking, the interpretation will always create controversy, and that's just the nature of sport, and that's the nature of human error. So we talk about when you say like it actually creates more controversy. Yeah, of course it will, because we haven't eliminated human error.
Yeah.
What we might have done is eliminated one part of human error or human decision making, but what we've still left is a massive space for interpretation.
Yeah.
And this is where like my point was on my tweet was like, if you get 3 people working together, you're going to reduce that amount of interpretation to a little bit less. And it's still not going to be perfect, but what you might get is someone saying it from a different point of view, and actually someone who's extreme before might rein it back in, or whatever it might be. It might work well. It might be horrendous. It really might. It might not work at all because you've got 3 people singing from completely different hymn sheets and it goes awfully.
Yeah.
But at least you give the opportunity to try it, to then know, okay, this doesn't work. Let's go back to what it was. Or let's go to just 2 umpires. So just the umpire that made the decision and the video umpire, and they see it on the big screen. Or maybe it's just the 2 reserve umpires discuss it, the reserve umpire and the video umpire. I think the more we can get to like that point of conversation, I think that's what's interesting with it, is that it gives just a different potential feel that may work, may not.
Yeah.
If you look at like NBA basketball, for example, it normally is, there's a little bit of conferring, and sometimes and what's really been interesting is when they mic up. So a guy called Richard Jefferson used to play, old player, now wants to become a referee. They mic'd him up and he was just discussing things with the umpires themselves, like the previous referees. Obviously done it for a long time, and he's coming in and he says openly, he's like, I've not even thought about it that way. Oh, that makes complete sense to why you made that decision then. And they've had like proper, like you can hear the discussions going on, and that's the bit that I think would be really interesting, is kind of, there's always going to be human error, but can we get to a point where people understand the human error?
Yes.
That then suddenly the judgment isn't, you're a terrible umpire. It's actually, that's interesting you had that discussion.
Yeah.
Can you see it from this point of view? Can you see it from our point of view? And kind of then what you get is that little bit more working together and cohesion, that actually then people aren't working against each other, people are working with.
Absolutely.
And but there's always going to be, as you said,
I see the merits in that process. And obviously, I mean, you've watched a couple of, minutes of shows, and you can see that I'll pull out a clip for a decision, and 45 minutes later, I'm at a very solid maybe. Like, yeah, that could be, sort of thing. Like, it depends. Yeah. Sometimes I feel pretty clear on something, and then another time I can't. But I do all that work to talk through it, and yet, I'll still have 40 people in the comments, half of whom agree with me and half of whom don't. And, the level of subjectivity that we have in the game is such that not only do you have sort of people who we have this need to explain things better, but what kind of skills do umpires need in order to be able to explain things better? So now we're introducing a whole new element. Not only do you need umpires who are extremely fit and fast and know the rules, but also, particularly on, your plane of playing field, they need to be able to communicate excellently in English. Like, not just know 50 words of vocabulary, but to actually be able to outline sophisticated concepts in a concise manner so that they could do, as you're suggesting here, that a conversation happens between, you know, the video umpire and the pitch umpire, or the two pitch umpires, or the whole, like, whoever. That's not easy stuff. And I don't know
No,
if you
not
were
at all.
around back in the day when they had dedicated video umpires. Andy Mayer, Lisa Roach, Carol Machette. I think Floppy Nell was one as well, where they would be the ones traveling to a tournament and they would do almost all of the video umpire appointments. And you got
Yeah.
Andy Mayer, and I mean, he's Andy Mayer. He's sitting back and he's, let me tell you a story about this play. And he'd do the whole Sean Connery thing, and it would be completely awesome. I loved every second of it. And, you know, the fans loved it too. And I know he misses it terribly, but that's a very special skill that he's developed because
100%.
he's a teacher. He's done all these things in his life. And then he umpired at the Olympics a few times. And, you know, so he had one of the most decorated umpiring careers. So he gets to this level and he's able to do that. How many other umpires are going to be able to develop those skills and get to that level when it's pretty hard just to make good decisions on the pitch on the regular, you know?
Yeah.
Just
100%.
so it's a whole nother package of skills again that maybe we can develop as umpires and we can get to that point, but we need a lot more help. We need a lot more support to get to that. So yeah, you talked about the big screens and how, you know, that would be good. I just think that, yeah, the big screens should be used, and really the broadcast that we see at home, we just have to get to the point where they're seeing what the video umpire is seeing in those same angles.
I agree.
And as soon as, and that does happen occasionally, you know, in some of your, you know, some of your pro league matches, you'll be at a facility and all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, that's clearly the video umpire angle because they're going beep, 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 back 3 frames, forward 3 frames, and then they're flipping to another angle quickly. And you're like, oh, okay. Like that doesn't look good for production purposes, but you can understand why they're going through that because they're trying to analyze the play. And I think that would be useful, super useful to have. That's kind of one of the necessary things.
I think the other thing about it is kind of the more you have that stuff is the more you kind of engage that TV audience and you basically educate more. So rather than constantly talking about the simple context of the sport, at the end of the day, I actually think hockey's not that difficult to understand in terms of the simplicity of it. But the more you can get that kind of, so as you say, like if you can get an umpire going through 3 frames and discussing and literally just being like, I'm currently just looking to see if there's a stick block or a stick tackle. Mm-hmm. That gives the commentator that ability to explain in roughly like 10 seconds what that is, and that's it, done. And then you almost don't have to over communicate then. It's actually the simplicity of it is, so as you're saying, when we're talking about like explaining things quite in depth, the more you can hear it all, the more actually the umpires don't necessarily have to, because you can hear the discussion going on. Yeah. And that's the bit that I think's more interesting. And that kind of like, at the end of the day, I don't like arguing with umpires. I find it quite awkward. And I always try as a player to kind of like build a bit of rapport with umpires, because I think I don't see the point in us trying to fight each other when we can just work together and we can solve everything. Like at the end of the day, if I make a mistake and I give away a corner, that's my responsibility. Yeah. Whereas if I'm making the right decision on the pitch, actually it should make the umpire's job pretty easy. And then we should actually be able to build rapport, get through the game, at the end of the game, shake hands, and if we're lucky enough, have a beer afterwards. If in a perfect world. Yeah. Whereas I think that's what's really interesting is kind of like sometimes it feels like you're battling for the sake of battling. Yeah. Without really having a reason to do so. And that kind of like the minute you get into the point where you can have that open conversation with each other and you can work with each other, it becomes a lot easier. You don't hear half the conversation. Then suddenly you get a hostile goalkeeper, you get a hostile halfback, you get a hostile midfielder, because there's been no understanding. And as you say, when you don't see the angles that the video umpires are seeing, that's when the confusion comes in, because what we see as players, we automatically think is perfect and right, and it's not. Yeah. the conversation that you can have is then actually, oh yeah, actually you can see it on the big screen. Well, that makes sense to why the decision's been given or not given in quite a lot of cases. Is kind of that makes more sense. But if we don't get that discussion or that exposure to it as players, we're the same as people in the stands or people at home or the commentators or even the other umpire. Like there's just confusion.
Right. So you're
Because
saying
it's just
that,
a lack of clarity.
So that conversation, if you as players can be privy to it somehow, that will help alleviate your frustrations in
100%.
understanding why those decisions. Yeah.
100%. I think the funny thing is when most players are asking questions, they're normally trying to either one find out the rule, because some rules like the aerial rule, people still don't know what the right rule is. But also like in the context, it's just trying to find out what the actual decision is being made based upon.
Yeah.
Majority of the time. So that's what I mean by like, because we're having to be vague with questions.
Yeah.
When we get vague responses, it makes no sense, because what we actually want to ask is a certain thing has happened. Or to be fair, in certain contexts, you're just asking, is there a foul? At the end of the day, 10 seconds left in the game, whatever it is. But like, there are times where you know exactly what's happened, but to try and explain it is so difficult that then, unfortunately, the actual incident that you're asking for, so like a third party, for example, is so specific. To ask for that situation is actually, it's going to be, because it's so subjective, you just don't ask for it. Well, it's a foul, but you can't ask for it because it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, that's when it becomes really difficult when you're trying to like, whereas again, like for example, if we're asking a question and we're mic'd and we can be picked up on the mic, for example, then all three umpires can hear it. There's going to be one umpire that will probably understand it better than the other ones. So for example, like there's potentially a higher chance that actually then the right decision gets made, if that makes sense, because there's just more understanding and there's less interpretation of the question. It's actually the question's just there. Does that make sense? It's quite wordy.
Absolutely. No, I totally get it. And it leads me to this question. I'm wondering, what kind of training do you get as a player in handling video referrals? Because if you believe, and this is an arguable point in my view, that these are pivotal moments in games that, can make the difference between, one result and another result. I don't subscribe to that strategy, but that's fine. How much training do you guys get on how you ask questions, who asks questions, who makes the decision to ask questions, and how do you handle the results afterwards? Is that something that you spend time in your trainings, your psych discussions, anything like that?
So we've had quite a lot. It's quite interesting. We've had quite a few I say quite a few, but it normally comes up in psych discussions. You normally ask others to see if they've seen what you've seen, is normally the way, unless you're 100%. If you're 100% sure, ask, because at the end of the day, you ask. Whereas like there's certain times where you're like, you look around, and if you don't have full confidence in the other people around that they've seen the same thing, you don't ask it. So we're quite lucky at our base. We've got somebody on a camera. So when it's gameplay stuff, there's an opportunity sometimes to be able to ask it. So we actually do train it.
Oh, okay.
But what's frustrating is when you're 100% right, you're right, but it's quite specific and you don't get the decision in game, is then actually you go back. And so we go back and so some of us will look at the referrals that we use.
Okay.
We'll go back and we'll go, no, that's the right decision to use it. We just didn't get it this time.
Okay.
But it's knowing that you're using it in the right way.
Right.
So we definitely go back and check.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, if you don't have it at a pivotal moment because you've wasted it on something crap, well, that's you need to learn from that to learn to use it better. Yeah. So a lot of the time we try not to use it in interpretive situations, because we know it's the classic argument, subjective versus objective. Do you go, actually, we need the objectivity side of it more. Yeah. So then, but at the same time, if there's something so blatant, go for it. So we're quite we're quite methodical in the way we use it majority of the time. Yeah. And we try to, a lot of the chat is about trying to take the emotion out of the decision. Just because you want it to be right doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Yeah. And that's the big thing that we've worked on as a group, is to make sure that when we refer, So, for example, the one in the Australia England game in the semi,
Yeah.
because our coaches had such an in-depth discussion at the umpires meeting about it all,
Mm-hmm.
and because we would use it again
Mm-hmm.
in that situation, because we know it was dealt with wrong at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we know it's the right call to make. We just didn't get it in that game.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of them things, because that we felt that was an objective situation rather than a subjective, when it turned out to be subjective, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's that kind of like mindset, in the same way that if India used it against us for one of the goals when England played against India, and in the same thing, they should use it then, because it's an objective situation. Like, at the end of the day, there was a specific rule. There were two things that were specifically dealt with: aerials into the 25 and in the D,
Yeah.
and free hits. They were the two big things that were special, that were talked about at the umpires meeting.
Yeah.
So then you use it in those situations, and like that, at the end of the day, it's just unlucky that it's not come off, because it's the right decision.
Yeah.
It just
Absolutely.
sometimes doesn't work out.
Yeah, I know exactly the goal you're talking about, the in the India game, but it happened like way up the pitch. It happened like deep in the other end. So there's no way, you can't refer that. It like
Exactly.
that's even further away than I remember the Surbiton Rotvice game at the AHL, where Burr chested the ball down just outside the 23 and rocks in and scores a goal, and it was just one of those complete angle things in the moment. But it's one of those where it's like, you can see it on the replay that it happened, but it's outside the 23. Do you think that there should be a scope to change where referrals can be asked about, or where the incidents could take place and you could refer that?
I think I don't think it should, but I think this is where the third and fourth umpire bit comes back in.
Mm-hmm.
Is, I think, because you have a different angle, because you'll be middle of the pitch, you'll have again a different angle that you can kind of almost start checking, almost like having cameras.
Yeah.
You just have four sets of eyes, and I think that makes a big difference in terms of being able to see. The problem with, if you change the rule and take it outside the 23, there's so much more scope for referrals that it becomes a little bit ridiculous, unless you say you can only use it on goals, for example, if it's outside the 25. Then in which case it might be a case of you have a 10 sec, it's got to be within a 10-second window, or a 5 or an 8-second, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You'd have to put a nuance to it, because otherwise, again, the referral you're looking at is going to be, you've got a 45-second clip to try and find something that's just going to be nightmarish for that third umpire. I'm just going to whack the light on.
Yeah, no, all good. No, that's a good point. And I think that's the big fear. And it's not even just the time frame. It's that within 8 seconds of a goal being scored, there could be 14 things that happen. And there's an advantage there, and then there's a no benefit gained there, and then there's definitely a foot there. But let's just play that on and see what happens. And then, and from a ball that's taken from an interesting place way down in the other defensive end, for that to lead to all those eventualities, there's so many other things that could have changed the path of that goal.
100%.
So
100%.
How do you ascribe the causality? And it kind of gets back to my philosophy about decision making in games, is that there is no decision that changes a game. Every decision changes a game. Every action changes a game. It's 100%. Butterfly effect, and it just, like, everything is just flapping out there, going in all these different directions. So it kind of takes me to the last thing I wanted to ask you about, which was, now that I think we both really understand how much money would be involved in trying to augment the technology. There's a few procedural changes we could make. We could give the video umpire more responsibility to see off the ball code of conduct things, blah, blah, blah. But the technology that we'd have to pay for, I'm wondering, for the 2 decisions a tournament, where it really comes into a play that the amount of tech that's there, or it's not being properly applied, is it worth the money that the players aren't going to earn, and that don't go to the marketing of that entire tournament, and doesn't go to supporting the umpires, and and all of these things? When we are so strapped for money, does it do we want to put all those resources into improving the tech behind our VR? Or maybe, there's, we got 99 problems and that ain't one. Is that a
Well,
possibility?
this is, I think, yeah, I, I think it needs to be there. I really do. I think
Okay.
video umpiring, I think it is the next stage of where we want to get to. And I think
Hmm.
it's the right thing to have it in the sport. I think my big bugbear, and this is with quite a few scenarios, is basically like at the end of the day, you've got to go out and got to almost cold call and get some sponsors in. I think. Do I think hockey's worth being on board? It's a tough one. I think you're probably better off finding an online streaming platform that people can access it for cheaper.
Hmm.
I think is probably a better opportunity where everybody can get it on the same streaming websites rather than going down the BT Sport route. Because as much
Yeah.
as it's great,
Yeah.
it's a very much privilege to have BT Sport, especially in the UK with the current prices and everything else going up and up and up and up.
Yeah.
TV is probably going to be the first thing that gets cut because you just don't have to have it.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me, like the minute you change that is then actually do you then get your own support crew that moves around and this, that, and the other, and actually it becomes a full-time role for certain individuals and it becomes just one crew that moves around. I don't know what the answer is. But I think for me, I think the video stuff has to stay in. I think if
Yeah.
we lose that, we lose a real competitive edge, and that's what I mean by. And I know it's not perfect, but it's still very good.
Oh, yeah.
It's can we at the top of the game, can we make it better and better? That then it becomes almost this is great. This is actually a real strong point of the sport because at the
Hmm.
moment it's not a strong point. It's not the worst thing in the sport by a long stretch,
Right.
but it's definitely not the perfect thing. And as you say, like could the money that whatever the lucrative deal is with BT Sport or whatever it is for the Pro League stuff, could that go to potential better uses? Yeah, it probably could.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about trying to progress the sport, there's a lot of things that aren't particularly right with it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at certain decisions that have been made along the way by FIH, I'd question it quite heavily. And I'd love to hear the answers, but you never get the answers, which is always quite interesting. Um, but if we're talking certain decisions, I think it's really interesting that the BT Sport deal, which is great. I do love the facts on BT Sport, but that's because I have BT Sport. I think it's a very different thing if you don't have it, and
Yeah.
and trying to get people to engage with a sport that already people think is middle class, to try and get new people to engage in it is quite difficult.
Yeah.
And that's the bit
Absolutely.
that's quite frustrating is kind of,
Yeah.
and I've talked to companies before, I've had meetings with companies about how we can try and like make it less mainstream and make it more in a city and make it accessible to more and more people. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the problem is it costs money to get to that point,
Yes.
but no one's willing to put the money in to get to that point. And that's where like it goes back to kind of like the sponsorship stuff and like what do you do? Do you try and get bigger sponsors in, or do you just get money where you can that can help promote and push and help people out along the route? And that's crux of the problem probably with hockey, is the fact that we're probably asking quite a lot of money to sponsors
Yeah.
that aren't really that bothered about putting that much money in, but would contribute. Can we get to a point where we just financially help out more and more? Do we get a hotels deal with FIH that
Yeah.
then means that suddenly hotels cost cheaper for hosting nations?
Hmm.
Do we then get a food sponsor or company sponsor that comes in? So actually what it might be is that you then get Airbnbs, for example, or something that kind of like just that little bit more support where you can kind of it won't look 5-star resorts. Like that's not what we're asking, but what
Yeah.
we're asking for is just kind of like, can we cut costs where we can
Yeah.
to help push the
Absolutely.
other sides that are struggling a little bit more?
Yeah.
Because I think the fact that umpires don't get supported is genuinely baffling to me, because it doesn't make any sense if we're talking about wanting the best for the sport. It doesn't make any sense if you're not prepared to look after the guys at the top, let alone
Yeah.
the trickle effect down. We need to start looking after people better if we want to get the best out of everything. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, at the end of the day, if you've got a choice between a pro league trip to Argentina where you're not going to get paid or work where you are going to get paid, you're probably going to choose the work, unfortunately, as much as you'd love to do the other one.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's only so much time people
Yeah.
can get time off work as well. Kind of
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, people have got normal jobs. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't work in terms of the long run. It just
Those
doesn't
those umpires are
work.
making those choices every day. Every day.
Yeah, exactly.
And the net result of that is that you've got a class of people who have been able to rise to the top. And this is no shade at all to anybody who's up there. And I'm one of those people that when I was pursuing my Olympic dream, you know, I was in the extremely privileged position that I was able to go over to England for 6 seasons and spend all that time in the National League. And that's the only reason I got any good whatsoever. But I could do that because I was in a very financially privileged spot. But
Yeah.
I bet there are 5 women in Canada who could have been better umpires than me, but didn't have the financial resources I did. So they didn't have the opportunity to travel abroad and not have to work, you know, for those months and you know, didn't have family over there and all those sort of things. So you're eliminating a bunch of people who might have the skill sets that we need, that might be excellent orators and might be really great with video technology and might be really great at building rapport with players, but because they're not rich enough, they can't
Yeah.
do it, essentially, to put it in very plain terms. So that hurts the sport.
yeah.
That hurts you guys. That hurts the game. It's not good enough. It's just not.
I think that's the other thing is kind of like, for me, the big thing is kind of not admitting that.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, finance is a problem.
Yep.
We're talking about when we're not a major sport, but financially, it's a sport that does struggle at times. But what annoys me is when people don't admit to the struggle. So actually, like it is a middle class sport. There is an inherent issue in the UK with it, and I don't have the answers. I don't know what the answers are because at the end of the day, people need to work for money, and it becomes complicated in terms of. But
Yeah.
there needs to be an effort made if you want to break through that barrier of it being a smaller sport and you want to make it more of a major sport. For example, in the UK, results don't seem to be an issue. The women won Commies gold.
Mm-hmm.
The women football won
Euros.
the Euros.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you know about one and you don't know about the other, back to your point about is the money being well utilized in terms of the marketing side of things, like at the end of the day, marketing should be all over everywhere.
Yeah.
It should be everywhere,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's, can we get to a point where access is, like, at the end of the day, the Euros were on BBC, the Commies were on BBC, so people managed to see that.
Mm-hmm.
World Cup, BT Sport, right? Okay, so you're already losing half the population already, or probably a lot more than that in terms of who don't have access.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what's the issue there? Well, can we get to a point where it's, for example, streamed on YouTube? Like, can we get to a point where sponsors are happy for it to be there because the money's coming in? Like, what is the best way to do it? I wish I had the answers. I really do.
Yeah.
But it's like, what is the next point that we can get to a point where there's so much exposure, the sponsors coming in, that financially the sport isn't in a issue.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to like the kind of like World Cup stuff, is actually like, as much as it was great having it in Spain and Holland, can we just put it in one place where it doesn't cost teams God knows how much to fly between venues, to have 4 flights booked because they don't know when they're going to go, to pay for 2 hotels for God knows how long? Like, for me, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Because all you're doing is you're wasting money along the way for something that we think would look great, but in practicality really doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because we just don't. It just, financially, it's not an issue.
Yeah.
So you're asking Chile hockey, or you're asking Spanish hockey to support Chile when they might go to 4 flights, and that it just doesn't make any sense in my head. That kind of side of things. But I don't know. That's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that kind of gets to my point that, I mean, I agree that video referrals are not as good as they could be. I think that we can solve some of the problems with some changes that are actually doable. But at this point, I don't know. And maybe it's because I'm not playing at your level, and I would never understand that. But I feel like that a lot of that money that would be needed to make the technology better could be better spent in, just helping athletes, helping the players, be able to do this full time in more countries, helping the umpires get better, helping the technical officials get better. They need training too. They need help as well. And
I think
the net
that
result of that would be way bigger, for the
yeah.
entire sport. And so,
No, I agree. I think you touched on it then. It's the education bit.
yeah.
It's the education of can we utilize what we've got rather than probably evolving it? Can we utilize it better?
Yeah.
Can we utilize what we've got in terms of, like, as you say, like if we can get that third, or let's say, for example, you get the third and fourth umpire in, actually then there's less pressure on the referrals because there's more eyes that have seen the game.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, from that point of view, then suddenly you have, instead of having 4 nations that are full-time internationally, then suddenly we get 6, 8, 10, 12. Each team's got a main sponsor. Each team's got 3 or 4 side sponsors. Each team's got their own airplane sponsor or flight sponsor, for example. Like, each team's starting to make connections with a hotel chain. Then suddenly what were previous ridiculous costs are now getting cut quite significantly, that actually the money then goes back. Oh no, we can actually support the umpires. We can actually support this, that, and the other. We've now got 20 umpires in the UK that are now, they've got full-time gym programs because we've managed to connect them with the governing bodies, that then meant that they've got an actual trainer that can look after them all. Then actually we've got a training base where they've got 5 cameras, 5 computers where they can work with, and they've got a computer. Like, the opportunities are endless, I think. But the big thing is at the moment is, as you say, like, where's the right place to invest the money? And I think you're right in terms of education is probably at the forefront of it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think we're now in the position where people in the positions that can educate are now able to educate because they've got the experience, they've done the work, they understand it a lot more themselves. I think that's actually what's quite cool about where we're at the moment, is the fact that we've now got people with double-figure years of experience of working with cameras in terms of within hockey. Because as you say, if you get football guys in, or you get like a different sport that don't necessarily understand the dynamics of it and how it works, I think that does make a massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And your point about how we now have a generation of umpires who have a lot of experience that they can then pass on, because the umpire managers that they're working with didn't have, video referral at all. For the most part, I'm trying to, I'm thinking about that generation. And I mean, even somebody like me, I had it at one tournament before I retired because of the generation I was part of. So that should actually really make me, in a lot of ways, not a very good coach of video umpires, because what do I know? I wasn't in that spot. I don't have that direct experience. So yeah, I think things will definitely, get better. And I think you've made some really good suggestions on this. I like, especially the conversation that needs to happen. I'm a big fan. Hopefully this will come up. I'm a big fan of umpires explaining big decisions to particularly the captain of the team that has just lost the decision. I think that's something that I preach to the umpires I coach all the time. Is like, just take that second before you make the signal, before you move on with things. Just go and talk to them and say, hey, this is what we've got. And if you're just over the radio with your colleague because you don't have video referral, take that second to have that conversation, come together, do that thing, because that conversation will help. They can then turn around and explain to their teammates and say, yeah, this person's an asshole, I don't agree with them, but this is what they said. So now at least you know. And those are the kind of proactive steps that we should be taking a lot more often. And I think, I don't know if you've noticed this trend, but definitely the video umpires at the Commonwealth Games, and a few of them at the World Cup, and I think you'll see more of it at your tournament as well, that you'll hear the video umpires starting to talk more and explain their decisions a little bit more when they can. For years, they had a script, and literally they could only say what was on the script. I have a decision for you. No advice possible. Like, it had the options. It was a choose your own adventure with very limited, you're not allowed to talk outside this, because some umpires can get into trouble at times if they try to shoot off the cuff, but some of them really can add value and really help everybody understand the decision. And I think things are starting to turn back that way, that they're getting, allowed out of the park a little bit, and able to explain that a lot more thoroughly. So hopefully that trend will continue as well, because that'll make a massive difference, I think. For
Yeah,
sure.
massively. I think that's
There you go.
the big, as you say, is the big thing is not, you don't want to hamstring people by limiting them, but what you do want is the simplicity of the answer. You don't necessarily need 15,000 words when 10 works,
Yeah.
but what you do need is people to be able to say the 10 rather than just a no advice possible. Actually, do you know what?
I'm taking notes
We've
for my
looked
next
and
live
it
stream.
hasn't,
What do you
and
mean I don't need 10,000 words? Tell me more about this. Because I'm the worst. Everybody knows. And here we are. We've been sitting here for, I don't know, an hour and 45 minutes, which is ridiculous. I'm so happy that you took this time out. And I don't know, do you feel like you understand more? And I mean, I certainly do. It's really great to hear your perspective as a player, but were there some holes that I was able to fill in for you that, now you're
massively.
like, oh, I get it a little bit more. Okay, cool.
100%. I didn't realize the sheer lack of support that the guys get at the top,
Yeah.
let alone further down. I
Yeah.
didn't understand.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it because I just assumed that there would be
Yeah.
some support, but clearly there is a complete lack of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of that education bit, like for me, it's quite eye opening to the fact that, like,
Yeah.
as you say, when I'm there going, oh, the video is useless. Like, what were we even doing? Actually, there's a lot more issues that need to be addressed first before worrying about
Yeah.
the most high tech bit of kit we've got. Actually, there's stuff that fundamentally needs to be better
Yeah.
first before worrying about that. And I think that's the bit. That's the big bit. Is kind of that's the eye opening bit for me. Is like,
Okay.
oh Christ, I've been almost going about this completely the wrong angle when there's bigger problems afoot.
Yeah. No, and it's totally fair. And I think that's why it's so important for us to have these conversations. And I think for me, it's good to hear just how important those decisions really are, because, I do try to stress that holistic view of the game, that it's 60 minutes of all these things, beautiful and terrible, that it all can happen. And that, but how we present the big ones and how we show where they are in the scope of the game, I think is just really important. So I appreciate that reminder. That really helps me out. So people are starting to understand. I'm trying to wind this down because you spent so much time with me, which I really appreciate. And I hope everybody in the comments, I didn't get to a lot of, I usually bring a lot of the comments on screen and have dialogues with people, which is kind of weird because they can't talk back to me about all the things that they've said. I think that it's important for people to hear that you do, again, this amazing podcast. Let's stick together. You started your next season because you've already sat down and recorded it. When's the episode coming out? When's your big editing team going to have it done?
It should be Friday, but it might be a week later. We might backlog and have an extra episode up. So we're just we're working through that right now because the design team at the moment are currently very busy. So we've just got to wait a little bit potentially. But
there you go.
That'll come out in the next week or two.
Okay. And honestly, you guys, it's fantastic. The link is in the description. Go and seek that out. Are there any other projects that you're working on right now? Are you going to grow your hair out again and do the whole charity thing, or what are you doing? What are you doing with your
I'm going to be growing it again, but I'm going to keep it this time. Nice. This is the last haircut. I actually had the last haircut today, so that's the last one done. Yeah, I guess my big thing is just trying to make sure I'm back for the World Cup. I think I've got 8 to 12 weeks in rehab where I've got to try and just attack everything in the hope that I can make that push for that Argentina Pro League. That's a big one for me in terms of a date to really try and hit.
How far out in advance is that from the World Cup?
That's early December, so it should be doable in terms of fitness wise. It's just a case of whether I'm ready or not. And I'll only know once I'm there in terms of once I'm arriving at that date, whether I'm ready or not. And that's, I think because of previous injuries, I'm okay if I'm not ready for it. I think that's kind of an acceptance that my body's my body. And at the end of the day, I've got to listen to it. I think that's the beauty of, again, having those injuries is kind of, I'm quite methodical with that.
Yeah.
I think this one just hit me. I think this injury hit me harder than I realized just because it was mid-tournament rather than before or after. So sitting in the stands for 4 games at a home at a home multi-sport event was pretty
Yeah.
tough. But yeah, I think the one thing that's quite cool is the fact that I think the tournament was a complete success, which is a nice feeling coming away from, especially with how well both our men and women did. Obviously, with the women winning gold for the first time, I think that kind of like you appreciate how good it was that it was on home soil.
Yeah.
I think that's what was really cool.
Yeah. And what I like is about how England hockey picked up the momentum from the CWs and pushed that straight into the World Cup bid. And I know you've tweeted about it and talked about how you're supporting it. What is a World Cup? What would a home World Cup, I think, bring for the program? You potentially as a player and all of your friends and things like that. What would it mean to you guys?
I mean, so the women had it in 2018, and I didn't realize the impact until during. And I realized how many people actually went to the event, and kind of you appreciate how great a show they put on there.
Yeah.
The big thing we struggle with is the fact that with a smaller team, I think contrary to like most sports in the UK, in terms of when it's a dual sport, women's hockey is very much more the prevalent thing, and actually it's great for us, I think, but it also gives us a real opportunity to kind of try and catch them up a bit in terms of that exposure and kind of really push the sport in general.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's not a men's bid; it's a men's and women's bid in the same way that I think the 2018 one was. In terms of, obviously it's just the men playing, but in terms of the sport in general,
right?
I think the more exposure we can get for the sport in the UK, the better.
Yeah.
So I just hope basically if we can achieve what they've set out to achieve, I think it could be one of the most unbelievable tournaments.
Yeah.
The stadiums they'll be using are vastly different to what we normally have.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really exciting. And the minute you go into like a different stadium, or you get into it doesn't have to be massive, but just a different stadium just gives you that feel of this is something a little bit different, a little bit special. And for us, I think it's where the group is as well in terms of how much more we're improving recently. I think it's a real opportunity to not just win the bid, but also do really well at the tournament and have that. I mean, to win something at your own home World Cup would be pretty incredible. So I think from that point of view, it's a really exciting period for us for hockey in the UK at the moment, especially within England, with the women doing so well and how much of a run they've been on.
Yeah.
And the men, although we didn't necessarily do what we set out to do at the commies, what we have shown is that we're getting better again. And that's the big thing, is kind of just keep it improving.
Yeah. Okay. And just catching my eye here, very important question, Adam. Is Brendan going to reverse invite Keely onto the Let's Stick Together podcast? I don't know if I could handle that level of shit talking, but I could probably try.
I'd have to speak to the other two chief executives before putting it out there.
The dynamic that the three of you have is fantastic, but if you ever wanted to have somebody on for 10 minutes that you could pick on, I'm really good at that. Canadians are super earnest and sincere, and I'd be like, wait, are you guys kidding or what? And I'd be all,
It's normally a Wednesday evening record, so it would technically work with your work with your timings.
There we go. We could do a whole.
In fact,
thing.
what it might be though, you might have a clash. That's the only thing with your normal posting.
Oh well, I think we could probably live stream the podcast recording onto FH Umpires. Oh, we can. This can be so good synergy. We can manage this. That would be totally dope. And I do want to talk to you about getting your podcasts like on YouTube regularly, because you guys need to get on that. I'm big in this live streaming thing, and YouTube has just pushed out their podcast tab. So you guys got to get on it.
Okay.
Overnight, YouTube turned into one of the biggest podcast indexers out there. As soon as they did that, it was, I don't know, like a week ago, boom, overtook Apple, just like that. Because they're so big.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll talk about this.
And that is something to kind of, that's definitely something that we've considered before.
Yes.
So
yes.
We'd potentially, we're facially quite awkward though, so it might be, I'm not sure it'd be that successful, but we can definitely try it.
Look, if an umpire can come out here, you want to talk awkward? Come on. I've mastered the art. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Okay. So there you go. There you go. Oh, and yes, you're getting officially invited onto the FHU Discord. For those of you who are watching at home and you're wondering, what are they talking about? This is the community that we come in and we post a lot of Schitt's Creek gifs. So fhempires.com/Discord. There's your official invitation, Brennan. You can stop in. We have some of the FIH umpires in there and that sort of thing. So, but we can continue the discussions and talk about all the things that we learned from Brendan in there. But anyway, thanks again for all this time. It was amazing. And
No, thank you.
I hope we can
great.
do it again in the future. And if it's not on Let's Stick
100%.
Together, you're welcome to come back anytime. And maybe we can talk about aerials next time. Who knows?
Yeah, you'd need a full 2 hours for that stint, I think.
Well, apparently we can manage it. So there we go. All right. Thanks very much, everybody, for playing at home. Appreciate all of your comments and your conversations. Thanks for keeping the chat going. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Bye, everybody.